everybody, and welcome to another episode of Adventures with Andi. Today we're going to do some glazing. Now, I don't mean donuts, although that does sound really good. Oh, Chad and I should make donuts sometime. That would be an awesome adventure. What do you guys think? If you think Chad and I should make donuts as an adventure sometime, drop a comment below, because that'll help me convince him to do it. Today, though, we are not glazing donuts. We're going to try glazing some yarn. Now, glazing yarn is where you use high heat and high acidity and dunk the yarn into the dye bath for a very brief period of time, like 5 to 10 seconds, so that the dye only strikes on the very outside of the yarn. It doesn't work its way into the whole strand. You do it on just plain undyed yarn. You could do it on variegated self-striping yarn, whatever you want. But today we're going to try doing it on some hopefully solid yarn that we dye. What I've got planned, give you a little bit of background here. I signed up for a knit-along for a pair of socks called Kilkelly socks, and these socks have just an absolutely gorgeous cable pattern to it. It's very intricate and just beautiful. If I were to knit these with a variegated or even a self-striping yarn, those cables would get a bit lost with the color, and I really want the cables to be the star of these socks. I really want the cables to show up just really, really well. And when I went and looked in my stash, which is totally sable, that is stash already beyond life expectancy for those of you who are unfamiliar, I discovered that all of the fingering weight yarn that I have that is solid either does not have any nylon in it, and a wool nylon blend is best for socks because they wear longer, they last longer if it's got that nylon in it. So either it has no nylon in it, it's just 100% superwash wool, or it's got something like cashmere or alpaca or bison in it, which is great if you live someplace really, really cold. Those are yarns that I either got just because I thought they were pretty, or I thought it was cool, or because I have relatives who live up in really, really cold places, like just outside Buffalo, New York, which is like snow central. I've been there once in the winter, and for a southern girl like me, it was an experience. But down here in North Carolina, we don't get that really, really cold weather. So if I wear socks that have, you know, a fiber like alpaca or bison or cashmere in it that's a really, really warm fiber, I'm gonna get overheated very fast. It's one thing in a shawl or even on arm warmers, because I can take those off, but it's kind of hard to take off your socks. So I wanted something that was a wool nylon blend. And the only thing that I have that isn't variegated in that is undyed yarn. So, you know, any excuse to dye some yarn, right? So I grabbed a skein of Knit Pick Stroll fingering, which is 75-25 superwash wool nylon, and I'm going to dye it. And what I decided to try to do is sort of a verdigris look. I'm going to dye it first with some Wilton Icing Gel Copper. And I'm going to do a low's not the right word. I'm going to do like a cold immersion type method with it, where it's just going to sit in a dye bath with no acid and no heat for hours to give it a chance for all of the dye to equally get into the yarn. I don't want anything to strike fast. This is a little similar to what we did to try to get the black for our Black Lives Matter Love is Love skein. We need that really slow take up of color, because if we have a fast take up of color, the red that's in this dye is going to take up faster. It's going to strike faster, and the other colors won't strike as fast, and we'll get more of a mottled look, and I don't want that for those. So we're going to start with the copper with a no acid, no heat dye bath. Let it go for several hours, possibly even until tomorrow, and then we'll go ahead and put some heat and some vinaigrette just a little vinegar at a time to go ahead and set that color in the yarn. And then I'm going to mix up some Wilton's Icing Gel Kelly Green, just a little of it, and we're going to put that in a dye bath with high acid and heat it up so that the dye bath is really hot. And we're going to then dunk that copper colored yarn into that dye bath really fast, like for just 5 seconds. And then we'll take it out, let it dry, see how, if we got a really good, nice, even glaze on it. If not, then we will dunk the less even areas at least back into the dye bath for another 5 seconds. So that's my plan. I have never glazed yarn before. Never glazed donuts before either. But I've never glazed yarn before, so I don't know how this is going to turn out. Copper at least is a brownish color, so adding green to it, I would just get another shade of brown if it doesn't work. So, but let's see what happens. I've already got the yarn in the crock pot and some water. It's been sitting there since yesterday when I got this idea. The knit along, by the way, of course, starts on Saturday, 2 days from now. So of course I get this idea 3 days beforehand, which yarn takes like 2 or 3 days alone to dry after you dye it. So I will obviously not be starting the knit along on day 1, but it runs until October 30th, I think, so hopefully I'll be able to get the socks done in time. So I've already mixed up the copper dye, so you guys don't have to sit and watch me do that this time. So I just have to add it to the dye pot, so I'm gonna have to clear some space off on my desk for the camera. Let me do that. I'll move the camera over. We will add this dye into our crock pot and just start letting our dye soak it up. All right, so I went ahead and took the yarn out of the crock pot, out of the water, squeezed out the excess, just so that I can go ahead and pour the dye in there and get it fully mixed up in the dye bath before putting the yarn in, so that we get as good a chance as possible of even coverage on this. This is superwash yarn, and as we know, even without vinegar and heat, superwash does have color strike to it more quickly than non-superwash. So I went ahead and just gave our copper dye a quick last minute mix with our electric mixer. I'm sorry, y'all, that's just, I have so much fun with this. It really is the little things that make me smile. Okay, I'll stop playing with that. I'm gonna go ahead and rinse off the tea. It's I put a 1/4 teaspoon of the Wilton's copper dye, icing gel copper dye in there. Rinse that off in there too, so we get every last little bit of dye that we can, within reason. I need to go grab a yarn mop. I should grab one of those minis. I'll do that after I get this going so that I can clean up the last of that. All right, so now that I've got the dye in here, and it should be fully mixed in there, you can see it's a nice, pretty sort of orangish color. So hopefully we get a nice copper shade from it. All right, I'm just going to put the yarn back in here. Make sure everything is covered. And you can see we've already got color going in here pretty fast. It's just not set yet, but that's okay. But make sure everything is covered. Put the lid back on here. I will probably come through at least a couple of times during the day and just pick the skein up and put it back in the yarn, in the dye bath again, to try to make sure that there aren't any spots that don't get as much exposure to the dye bath, to try to help us get that even coloring. You really need to move things around a lot in the dye bath to get really even coloring. But since we're doing a slow and cold method here, I'm not going to sit here and swish yarn around for hours. I got things to do in my day. So it's been about 24 hours and our dye bath hasn't completely exhausted, which I wouldn't have expected since we have no heat and no acid. But we're down to pretty much just a yellow on it. So we've had a lot of the color actually work into the yarn. Not set, of course, but it's gotten into the yarn, and that's good. But our yarn itself, as you can see, it's not really a copper. It's more of like a sherbet orange, which is not the color I'm going for. And we know it's going to be lighter when it dries. So at this point with this, it's going to be a really pale orange. And I want to get something more like that rusty metallic coppery color. So what I did is I went ahead and mixed up some more dye. This is actually a half teaspoon of the Wilton's Icing Gel Copper. I just scooped out just a little bit of the dye bath to mix it up in here. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in there. And this will hopefully get us to a more saturated color. As you can see, our dye bath now is more of this rusty color, rusty brown color. Excuse me while I wipe this off on our yarn mop. And I'm going to put the yarn back in here again, still with no acid and no heat, at least for the rest of the day, and let it take this color up really slowly to see if we can get to more of that rust color. So, oh, and I gotta tell you guys this, I am laughing here because I started this yesterday with this cold vat dyeing in an attempt to get as solid of a color as I can, right? This morning I start at my computer and I go over to watch YouTube videos while I'm eating my breakfast, as I do. And Rebecca over at Kim Knits this morning released a video where she talks about tips and tricks for getting a semi-solid versus a tonal yarn. And I am just laughing. I'm like, seriously girl, do you have my house bugged or something? Because this is not the first time that's happened where I'm doing something or run into a problem and within 24 hours Rebecca releases a video about that same thing. And she commented back and she replied and she said, I promise your house is not bugged. I don't know, I'm a little suspicious here, Rebecca. Either that or yes, like you said, great minds truly are thinking alike. All right, so I am gonna go ahead and just let this yarn sit at least for the rest of the day while I go about my day getting some work done. And then we'll come back and see how it's taking up the color and see about adding a little bit of heat and a little bit of vinegar to go ahead and get it to set and grab whatever's left in the dye bath. Okay, so it is again the next morning, but another 24 hours since I put that second round of dye in, and you can see we're again back to just a little bit of yellow in here for our dye bath. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and add some acid and some heat. Not a lot of acid, but you can see here's our yarn. It is a much better, deeper orange color this time. So I'm going to go ahead and move it. Squeeze out a bit of this excess water. And put it to the side. I'm going to put in just 1 tablespoon of vinegar for right now, which is not a lot. When I put that second round of dyeing, I added some more water as well. I think 4 cups. So that takes us to a total of 8 cups of water in here. And 1 tablespoon of vinegar is not a whole lot for that, but I don't want to go very high acid just yet, because I still want this yellow dye to take up slowly so that it gets spread all throughout the yarn to give us an even color. And I'm taking the yarn, I took the yarn out before putting the vinegar in so that I can stir the vinegar into the dye bath thoroughly and not have it hit one area of the yarn before it hits the others. Okay, put my yarn back in. Make sure it's all spread around in there good. And you can see that with that extra water in here now, the yarn it's got more room to move around, for the dye bath to move around it. Not a lot, because I'm working with a crock pot here. And you can see we're already, our dye bath is already, even without the heat, getting lighter. That's the effect that the acid has. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and turn the heat on. High, plug in the crock pot that's not currently plugged in, and let this sit for about a half hour. Then I will just unplug it, let it cool down on its own, and then we'll be ready to do the glazing. Our yarn stayed in the crock pot until it cooled. We got this really nice coppery orange color. And now we're ready to glaze. So I went ahead and heated up the crock pot. Real quick, you can see there's no color in here. Okay, there's a very faint hint color because I rinsed off something in there. But yeah, our dye all exhausted. And then I added another tablespoon of vinegar in, because for the glazing that we're getting ready to do, we want to do high heat, high acid, short time. So I've got a pH meter here so we can see what our water is at. It's at about 3 point. Are you going to keep moving on me? Around 3.4. You don't want to go below 3. From what I have read online, that can actually damage the yarn, and we don't want to damage the yarn. But 3.4 should be good. It should be really acidic. And I mixed up our Kelly green. This is about a half a teaspoon, maybe a little bit less than half a teaspoon of the Wilton's Icing Gel Kelly Green. Just mixed in some warm water. Rinse that out. Grab my yarn mop. Wipe everything off. Here's our yarn mop so far. And our yarn mop is safely ensconced in mason jar. Alright, I'm going to get this lid. I need to put this someplace safe, but I don't want to ruin my painting. So I'm going to put it over here. Chad's over there, been over there trying to hand me the mixtures. I'm like, okay, fine. Yeah, I just love doing this anyway. just to make sure the dye is all thoroughly mixed throughout. All right, here we go. There is no going back for this. So we're just going to dunk this in for 5 seconds. And then we're going to pull it right back out and put it in our bowl. I did sort of squeeze out the excess water when I got it out of the dye bath, but it does still have some water in here. So here we go. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi. Okay, it doesn't take very long. I'm just going to let this drain off real quick. And what we're wanting it to do with the glazing is to just strike to the very outside of the yarn. Come on, yarn. So we've got some areas here that were on the inside that don't look like they got quite that much dye on them. So what we're going to do is dunk it again really quick. Which is why I only did 5 seconds instead of 10, so that I would be able to do that. You know, here on the inside, we can definitely see we've got areas that didn't get any of the dye. So I'm going to try to sort of flip it inside out. So those areas will get the coverage this time, hopefully. All right, let's try this again. And 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi. Bonus geek points if you know what counting in Mississippis as opposed to Mississippis is from. And if you don't know what it's from, go watch Farscape, because it was a fantastic show. One of my favorite sci-fi shows of all time. All right, take a look. See how even this looks. Yeah, we still got a few little areas that I think could use with a little bit more, so. One more quick dunk. And 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi. And that's probably going to be it, because I don't want to risk going too far on the yarn that's been getting some. And that should give us a pretty even overall coverage. Okay, so now I am going to let y'all take a quick look at this. I might have glazed it too many times. We'll have to see. But if nothing else, it's a nice green. Yeah, I think these areas here just do not seem to want to get any of the green on them. But if I do this again, we're going to end up with just green. So we're going to go ahead and leave it as is. And I still have this whole pot of dye that I need to figure out something to do with. Because I still have to set this. And to do that, I'm going to need the crock pot. So let's go ahead and I'm going to toss our yarn mop in there. See if it can take up enough of this color. But it's possible I might have to go and grab another skein of yarn. Let's see. And here is our finished yarn. We didn't end up with a solid or a semi-solid like I had hoped. And we got a lot more green than what I had planned on. But this was my first time glazing yarn, and nobody is perfect at anything the first time, or even the second, third, 20th, 50th, whatever. It takes time to learn how to do something. So I don't think I did too bad for my first time. In hindsight, I probably should have only dipped it in the dye bath to glaze once, maybe twice. That third time I think was a little bit too much. And I think that's why we've got some sections here where, you know, it's pretty much an olive green. But we do have some sections where it just glazed the orange. And it looks a lot more of a brown, especially on the camera. But if you look at it in the sunlight, like when it's sunny outside, not threatening to rain as it currently is, but sunny outside and I take it over by the window and it's in that sunlight, you see this as, you know, you see those little glints of orange in there, and it looks more orange than brown, and you just see that just glaze of green over it, and it looks really, really cool. It is what I was really wanting. But the big question, of course, is how does this knit up? And here we go. Go ahead and move this out of the way a little bit so you can see. It actually knits up. You know, it is a pretty nicely blended color. I mean, we've definitely still got the orangish brown, we've got the sections of the green, but for this swatch, instead of doing straight stockinette like normal, I went ahead and I did part of it in one of the cable pattern charts from the socks I'm going to knit, just to make sure that they wouldn't get lost in the colors, because if it had been too busy, I would have said, okay, I'm going to be dyeing more yarn. In fact, I had actually fished out another skein of sock yarn from my bare stash of yarn, and it's like, okay, this isn't going to work, I'm going to have to dye some more yarn, but first, yes, I will at least knit up the swatch because I have to do that anyway. And when I knit it up and I put those cables in there, I was pleasantly surprised to find that no, they don't get lost. If it had been something much more drastic, like if I had had one end of it orange and the other end green, or if I had had, you know, splotches of green and splotches of orange all throughout, that would have been much more dramatic. That would have been a lot more drastic, and I think that, yeah, the cables would have gotten lost for the color on that. but this is subtle enough and it blends together enough that, yeah, you can still see them. This is actually the ribbing section of the sock. So that's why it looks kind of like ribbing, sort of. It's not one of the more elaborate cable sections, which I didn't realize until I was like 3/4 of the way through knitting. And I was like, oh, I happen to pick the chart that is the ribbing. So it kind of looks like ribbing, but you can still see the cable work in there. And yeah, they stand out. You don't lose them. Especially this one here in the middle, you can definitely see that. So yeah, I think this is gonna work really good for my Kilkelly socks for the knit-along. Now you may notice this skein is looking a little unorganized, shall we say. You've heard me mention before about how I want to be careful with the yarn because I don't want it to become a tangled mess or a tangled nightmare. This is a tangled mess. This is not a tangled nightmare because it's recoverable. But I had a lot of bleeding problems with this yarn. I set it in vinegar in the crock pot after glazing it and after using our yarn mop to soak up the last of the dye from that dye bath. Set it on heat for like half hour or so, let it cool in the pot, took it out, you know, once it was, you know, just warm, took it out, let it cool on my desk. And then once it was cool, I washed it and rinsed it, and I had a ton of bleeding. So I kept washing and kept rinsing and kept washing and kept rinsing until the water ran clear. And I was like, yes, cool, great. I've got all the dye out. And then I took it and I put it in my salad spinner and I spun it, and the excess water that came out from spinning it was yellow. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna set this again just to be on the safe side, just to be sure, just to make sure that I'm not gonna have any bleeding problems down the road. So I put it back in the crock pot, let the crock pot heat up on high. Once it was on high, I let the yarn stay in there while we were eating dinner, so about 45 minutes to an hour. Unplugged the crock pot and just let it sit in there overnight. Got up the next morning, had breakfast, had my cup of coffee, got the yarn out of there, washed it, rinsed it, had a ton of bleeding. So I just kept washing and rinsing and washing and rinsing and washing and rinsing until the water finally ran clear. And I was scooping the water out out of the wash bin with a white measuring cup to compare it with to see if there was any hint of color. I even had Chad come and look, and he's like, nope, looks clear to me. So, okay, I'm going to wash it and rinse it some more just to be on the safe side, just to make extra sure that there is no more dye hiding in there, that there's no more chance of bleeding. So I went ahead and I washed and rinsed it probably another good 10 times after it ran clear, just to make sure. I'm like, yes, this has to have fixed it. So I squeezed out the excess gently, brought it into my office, put it in the spin dryer, spun out all of the excess water, and it came out looking like this. And I'm at a loss. I'm like, I don't know why. I don't know if this is something that's always been the case, and I'm only noticing it now that I'm putting yarn through a salad spinner and am collecting that water to look and see. But yeah, this was noticeable even before I poured it into the measuring cup. In fact, and at that point I'm like, okay, fine. I'm just gonna have to accept that there is potentially going to be bleeding with this yarn, and just be aware of it when I wash these. It's just gonna be socks for me, because it's the reason I started knitting like 10 years ago, and I've never actually knit myself a pair of socks. So I just have to make sure we hand wash them and we're very careful and be aware that there could be some bleeding, and that's probably going to be the way it is. Oh well. So I went ahead and hung the yarn up on the curtain rod with a bin under it to catch the water, and the water that was dripping off was actually dripping off into the bin, and it was green. So yeah, just a lot of bleeding in this one. I don't know, I'm not sure why, but I'll, just like with the watercolor ball prints, I'll just keep an eye on it and see. I mean, the dye bath and the vinegar water that I used to set it, I tested that with a pH meter, and it was definitely acidic enough that it should have set this. I didn't think it was that much, too much dye in there. Maybe there was, I don't know. But yeah, in the course of rinsing, washing and rinsing the yarn that many times, even with figure 8 ties in here, even with 2 of these silicone ties in here, it still got all just flipped around and tangled around, and yeah, I've got like this dangling off the end where things got just all out of order when I had it on the Swift knitting up the swatch. But that's okay, because you know, I am literally going to go from filming this conclusion over to the Swift again and wind this into a center pole ball so that I can cast on my socks. And that is the key when your yarn gets tangled like that when you're washing it, when you're rinsing it after dyeing, is just hang it up and let it dry. After it's dry, then you can work on getting it untangled. I mean, this is actually a lot better than it was when it first came out of the rinse. It's a lot more organized than it was. But, you know, just putting it on the Swift and winding it into a center pole ball really helped. And you can actually, you know, sort of take the holder for the center pole ball off of the winder and feed that through if you need to, where yarn crosses over or whatever. And that's usually what I do to get it straightened out. So anyway, that is our, I know I was going to call this verdigris. I'm not really sure if it counts as verdigris. It looks kind of like moss on a stone, moss on a rock for me. It actually, you know what it actually looks like? They're doing construction down the end of our street, which breaks my heart because they completely bulldozed the woods that were down there to do it. But we're in North Carolina, so of course we have red clay instead of actual dirt. And it just keeps raining and raining and raining and raining and raining right now. And when it does, we just get these big, huge floods of water coming down the ditch in front of our house. And it's picking up all of that red clay from where they're doing the construction. And it just floods down our ditches, which of course, you know, are grass. So once all the water recedes away, you end up with the grass that's in the ditch and these rivulets of that red clay, which is kind of orange, going all through the grass. That's kind of what it makes me think of. It's every time I've gone down to get the mail ever since dyeing this, I'm like, yeah, that's what the yarn looks like. But you know, red clay in a grassy ditch is kind of a unappealing name for yarn. So I'm probably still going to go ahead and call this verdigris. I'm going to keep working on this colorway to get it to be something that's more what I had in mind. You can't always expect things to be exactly like you want them the first time through. That just happens. That it doesn't always work that way. But for now, I think this is perfect for the socks I'm going to knit. So I'm going to go find myself a center pole ball. And I will see you on our next adventure. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, like the video if you enjoyed it. And I'll see you on our next adventure. And you have a good day. Bye.